All right, well, I'm going to take you back in time to the foundations in the beginning, to everything that is what now has become DevOps, lean, agile, and go to what it means to really create a culture of learning. So go back to your very first job, when you're just out of college, or even if you didn't go to college, your first professional job, and what it was like for you. And imagine if you had an orientation where you were assigned some frontline work. Even if you were working in the back office or coding or nothing that was actually going to touch the customer, but you were given one simple task, and that was to pour a can of paint and a can of solvent into a big vat. And it would get all mixed up, and as the cars, because you were working in a car manufacturer, go down the line, the paint would get sprayed onto the cars and stick, and then off they go to be sold. Simple, right? Shouldn't be any mistakes. Well, one day, the shop floor manager runs up and says, "Wait, we have to stop the line. The paint is literally dripping off the cars. Over 100 cars were going to have to be repainted, stopping the line, a ton of rework, wasted time, wasted money, and all eyes go on you." That was your responsibility. What would happen at your very first job, or maybe your current job, if you had made a mistake that was really having some serious consequences? When I talk to people around the world, usually the first thought is, oh, someone would have yelled at you, blamed you, maybe you would have been fired. I mean, you were still in your probationary period. But that's not what happened to Isao Yoshino, a 40-year Toyota leader, when he joined Toyota Motor Corporation back in the 1960s. And this is why Toyota is such a company that so many companies around the world are trying to emulate in terms of its learning culture, the Toyota production system and the Toyota management system. So what his bosses did, although he acknowledges later that they probably had this moment of, like frustration, but they didn't act on that. They did something really special and different. They walked over and said, "Show us the process that you took to pour the can of paint and the can of solvent into the vat." And so he did. And it was clear that the cans looked nearly identical. There was very poor labeling, and they looked the same. And so it'd be very easy for a newcomer to make a mistake. And so they worked together and figured out a way to make sure that wouldn't happen again. And then they did something even more special. And this is truly the foundation of what we need to be doing as leaders, managers, and team members if a mistake happens. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of the talk, because it was truly something that blew my mind. And Mr. Yoshino was laughing and thinking back to this, because it's something that doesn't happen in many other companies. So I'm Katie Anderson. I don't know if I'm the lean expert here, but maybe I'll just, as Nathan and I were talking the other night, you just have to be a little bit higher than the other people in the room. I have been working with organizations around the world for the last 25 years to create high-performing cultures of learning and excellence. I've had my own consulting practice for 13 years. I'd come from healthcare, so working in another very complex system. And what it comes down to all is about people and how we create the conditions for learning. And that includes, that was the themes from this morning too. How do we create the conditions for learning so that we can leverage the technologies that enable us to be more effective, to create value for our customers? And that's really what it's all about. And that's what the Toyota production system was all about. 10 years ago, I had a serendipitous opportunity to move to Tokyo, Japan with my family. My husband's actually in the tech space as well. So I live in Silicon Valley, so I'm very familiar with software and tech. That's the world I'm surrounded by, even though it's not the world that I specifically work in. And so off we went to Tokyo, and I was so excited for the opportunity to go immerse myself in the origins of the Toyota production system and lean. I've become a Japanese management aficionado and learning enthusiast as well. And that has become the foundation of my enriched understanding of what it really, really takes to create cultures of learning and what it takes from the leadership behavior. And by leaders, I mean all of us in the room, because if you're working, whether or not you're a senior executive or you're running teams or working with teams, we're all leading people in some capacity. And so I'm on a mission to really get back to the foundation and the principles about what it takes. And it doesn't matter what industry you're working in, if it's manufacturing, healthcare, software, IT, biotech, it all comes back to to the human element, and how do we leverage technology to help us use the most of our humanness as well. And it comes back to working together. So here's a picture of me and Mr. Yoshino. This is actually 10 years ago last week. This is the very first time that we met in Tokyo. I just moved to Japan, as I mentioned, and I made my husband take the day off of work. We jumped on the Shinkansen 60-minute bullet train ride from Tokyo to Nagoya, and I really thought it was going to be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As John knows, was not. It became one of the most special and important relationships in my life. I've written a book called Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, which won the Shingo Publication Award, recognizing its importance in the space of continuous improvement and operational excellence, about his 40 years at Toyota. And I had a question on my mind. We started spending time together. He invited me to come back and continue to have conversations. And of course, when in Rome or when in Japan, you say yes. And I had this question in my mind. What is the secret to Toyota? What is the secret to Toyota? He said the only secret. Actually, at first he said, I don't know, there is no secret. He said the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning. We don't even notice and we take it for granted. And so this is the power, it's the attitude towards learning. And it's not about the tools, it's not about the techniques, it's not all the fancy visible artifacts that we get so excited by and we want to copy and implement. Those are helpful enablers, but it has to be grounded in an attitude towards learning. And that's a message I keep hearing over and over and over already this morning in the conversations last night. An attitude toward learning. So how do we create that and not get so focused on all the doing and the output? Because it's those conditions for learning that then allow us to create the value and do that more effectively and efficiently. So John asked me to bring in Deming here. We are at Deming Days, DevOps Days, the Deming Days. So what's the connection to W. Edwards Deming and Toyota, the Toyota Production System, Lean, Agile, DevOps? Well, it all comes back to Deming going to Japan after World War II, and for some reason we weren't listening in the U.S. Don't read John's book to really get all the history. It's a really fabulous book. And the Japanese companies and their leaders listened to Deming, and they inspired them to do better, to create higher levels of efficiency and quality by focusing on learning and the foundation of the plan, do, study, adjust cycle. Mr. Yoshino joined Toyota the year after it won the Deming Prize for quality. So he joined in 1966. And Toyota was already in this really people-centered learning culture. I mean, this is why his bosses responded in the way they did with the paint situation. And Deming is the reason why, in addition to other factors that were already there, that the Japanese companies became so strong and dominated and now continues to have these cultures of excellence that we really are trying to emulate and copy. And Mr. Toyota, back in the not get too close to that mic, said it was the foundation of their management system. So these concepts of systems thinking, of focusing on people and focusing on learning is really what is the secret sauce to all of the amazing things they've been able to do in terms of having better flow, built-in quality, continuing to innovate. So it's not just continuous improvement in terms of micro improvements, but really big innovations. If you think about the Prius back, 2 decades ago, this was something totally different and new, and they're always willing to try and learn. And here's a small picture of me and John. So John came to Japan with me 2 years ago to really immerse himself into this culture of learning and what the Toyota production system, the Toyota way is all about. And it's not just about Toyota, and it's not just about Japanese management, but there are some common human elements that we all have and that are important for bringing into our organizations as well. We just have some challenges in Western because the foundation here about the culture of learning is on the cycle of plan, do, check, act, or plan, do, study, adjust. I know there's going to be some more about that tomorrow. And we get so caught up in the plan, do, plan, do, plan, do. Or do. And the learning part happens in the study and the adjust side. So we don't feel like it's productive to be still and reflect and study on what actually happened and what did we expect to happen. So that's that learning zone in there. And if we do not take that time, we are not really having a true attitude towards learning. We are just focused on executing and doing. But are we doing the right thing? Do we even know what problem we're trying to solve? And so we have to get better at asking those questions and spending the time and reflection so that we can adjust. And that is really the secret that Toyota's been able to bring in, founded in what Deming taught them. And it's connected in all of from the daily work that happens all the way up to strategy, deployment, or what they call Hoshin Connery. There are check adjust or steady adjust times and periods built into the cycle, built into the work. And if we see that reflection time on our calendars, we just kind of rush through it. So we're like, I gotta put more meetings on. We just gotta keep doing, gotta building, gotta ship it. We gotta slow down and be patient and have that time for learning. And this, if we can do that, we're gonna be so much more effective in no matter what you're trying to build or ship. If that's what's really gonna, get that help with that bottleneck that we're having, we have to spend that time in studying. Another key concept, and this is related to the what we're talking about with AI, is how do we separate human work from machine work? And there's a word that Toyota created when they were building their production system. It's jidoka. And the way it's written in Japanese has an extra symbol in kanji. So usually it's like we think of automation. So how do we automate? How do we create more like let the machines do it automatically? But they added in a symbol that actually means human. And it changed the word to be automation with a human touch. So how do we integrate human touch to automation? And then how do we separate what should be machine work, what can the machines do, and now what can AI do most effectively? And then what is the human work? What are the special, unique things that only we can do as human beings? And so this has happened throughout time as machines have been developed. First they were analog machines, and this is actually how Toyota was founded as the Toyota Automatic Loom Works. The founder was trying to solve a problem for his mom. She was weaving, this is in the 1800s, and the thread always broke. And it was very frustrating and laborious with the time. And so he figured out how to create this special shuttlecock. And you can go to the Toyota Museum of Technology and Innovation and actually see these machines. John went with me. It's actually really, really cool. They have all the different machines. You can see the evolution of the innovation, which then turned into the car manufacturing from his son. But he created this true way to stop the line or stop the machine, and so the threads weren't breaking. It made it easier for her to do her work, and then created more automation, and that grew and grew and grew. But it was really about how do we help mistake-proof things, and how do we continue to innovate, and how do we get better at separating human work from machine work so that we can leverage human beings to their maximum capability and the things that are special for us. So why is this so hard in all of our companies? So, I work in more of the continuous improvement lean space across organizations, but I work with teams also doing Agile and now DevOps as well. We're trying to push the boulder up the hill from classical management. Why is it so hard? And from my deep immersion of both living in Japan and now continuing to go back to lead these executive learning trips, I've come to really appreciate and understand that we have it backwards. All companies want results for value for their customers or those business results that Nathan was talking about. But too often, we think about the results as the primary rather than the input. And in Japan and Toyota and some of these other companies, and they're great companies in the US and other Western countries too who do this, but they're fewer and far between, focusing on the inputs, on people and on learning, and then how do we leverage the machine work and the human work together. There's this great company I take people to they profess that happiness is their purpose. So creating human happiness for customers, for their employees. And this is not we have some great foosball tables. I mean, it's it's genuine human happiness. And how do we have this long-term view? And the chairman wrote a book called Tree Ring Management. And one of the lines that always sticks with me from that book is that profit is excrement. Profit is excrement. And he went on to say it's the natural byproduct of a healthy, functioning company. Like, you want excrement, right? But it shouldn't be your goal. And so the same way, if we think about the business results, we want those business results, but we have to think about how we're creating the conditions in our organization to create a healthy, thriving organization for the people who are there. And so we have it backwards. And that is really what the essence of lean is all about, but has gotten so forgotten in terms of how it's been translated. Last night, I was having some conversations about how language has been translated and how we think about language, and we've extracted these small elements, but not the whole thing. And we have to get back to the humanity and the learning aspect. So how do we do this? And is it possible to even change cultures or bring these concepts in? And yes, it is possible. And one of the best examples of this happened 3 decades ago when Toyota was starting to move manufacturing from just in Japan to the United States. And they actually waited patiently and let some of their competitors come to the US first because they wanted to study and learn from their experiences. And then they partner with one of the most challenging partners they could have chosen. So they chose GM, General Motors, and because they were unionized, and they wanted to work, and there was a horrible conflict between the union and management there. The plant in Fremont, which is really near where I live in California, became known as NUMMI, the New United Motor Manufacturing, Inc. Was the joint venture between Toyota and GM. It was the worst performing, and it was a terrible toxic culture where employees were actually trying to make things, actually intentionally doing things to cause harm to the cars, like loosening bolts or other things, which is terrible. They were just having this just antagonistic relationship. Well, Toyota decided we're going to learn from the hardest way, and they kept the same employees, the same management from the front line, and they brought them to Japan for an immersive learning experience to see what this would be. And Mr. Yoshino, who's the subject of my book, he was in charge of creating that learning program for the American managers. And his task was to change their culture. He told me, that was an impossible task. How can I change their culture? And I realized I couldn't change their culture, but I could create the conditions for them to learn and then want to change for themselves. And so that was really what it was about. How did he create the conditions for them to have a different experience? And they did. They had hundreds of managers come through on these 3-week learning programs. And within 1 year, it wasn't just that one immersive learning program. They also had coaches that came back and stood by them when they were back in Fremont. But within 1 year, the NUMMI plant went from the worst performing to the highest performing in all of GM. It's an incredible case study. If you haven't learned more, either read my book or go listen to some podcasts about it. It's really special. And this is John Shook, who wrote the foreword of my book, and he was the American who was living in Japan that Mr. Yoshino hired so that he could have some knowledge of American culture as well. And so that was them. And I actually met Mr. Yoshino at a conference a few months before I moved to Japan, and he gave me his card, and that's what he said. Look me up when you move to Japan. I'll take you to Toyota City. And I was like, what? It's going to be incredible. So there they are, and that was 10 years ago. And at that conference, when I was hearing Mr. Yoshino and John Shook talking, it was a lean coaching summit, so how do leaders be more coach-like? Mr. Yoshino said something that was really struck me as profound. He was sitting in the seats and writing notes. He said, my role as a manager, we're talking about how do you create this culture. He said, my role as a manager was to develop John by giving him a mission or target, and then support him while he figured out how to reach that target. And he said something that really felt quite profound and reflective to me. He said, and as I was developing John, I was aware that I was developing myself as well. And I reflected on that over the months before we moved to Japan, and then through all of my conversations with him, and in the synthesis of writing the book, I realized that everything that he and other Toyota leaders I've talked to came back to those 3 points. The leader's role, there's a lot of things we need to do, but a leader's role most simply is to set the direction. Where do we need to go? Provide support, create those conditions for learning, and to be able to create the capabilities for people to solve problems. And 3, develop yourself. because it is hard to do these things. And I want to talk a little bit about each of these and scratch the surface that you can go so much more into. But I want you to hold that. Set direction, provide support, develop yourself. And if you can do these things, whether or not you're a senior executive, a team leader, a manager, you are going to be so much more effective. So the first is, and I call it leading to learn, set the direction. And what's important here is about setting the direction based on what is actually needed, the challenge that is needed to be achieved, not just what we think we can achieve. Sometimes we set goals, we all learn about SMART goals. Well, those are great for stepwise, but if they're achievable, are we really stretching ourselves to learn something new, to go beyond? So the big goal needs to be set that's seemingly unachievable. It's seemingly impossible, not actually impossible, but really stretching us oh my gosh, we do not know how to do this. And then work and learn our way forward. And this is why having this culture where it's okay not to be right, to make mistakes, to have failure, is essential if you want to innovate and learn your way forward to those big goals. So talking about providing support, there's so much in here. One of the most important things that leaders need to do is to make the invisible visible. And that includes having an attitude that no problem is a problem and embracing mistakes. Because all of the problems are existing whether or not we acknowledge them or not. And so if we aren't making them visible either through systems or structures or through our reaction when people make mistakes or are off target, then we are hiding them and not allowing the opportunity for improvement there. So no problem is a problem, and that is a motto at Toyota. And going back to, Nathan and I were talking last night, I'm like, oh, you're saying all the things that I say too. Because this is the foundation, this is the essence. Leaders must create the conditions for learning so that we can develop the capability for being successful in problem solving. And this is one of the biggest shifts we have to make from being independent contributors, which are all rewarded for, having the right answer and being the one doing all the doing. I actually had an article today, came out in Industry Week, about are you in the doer trap? And this is such an easy trap to fall into as leaders or as internal change agents, because we're so used to doing the doing, but our role has to shift to no longer own the thinking, but to own the thinking process. So guys, the conditions for learning. This is an A3 document. It's a form for doing problem solving at Toyota, which became the foundation for strategy deployment and problem solving in the 1980s and 1970s and 1980s. And Mr. Yoshino was really an instrumental person in helping coach behind the scenes Toyota's senior leaders in being able to do this. And what he talked about is this stamp is his signature. It's called the Hanko. And the importance of this is actually John Shook's very first A3 that he wrote. And again, remember, he gave John a mission or target and supported him while he figured out how to reach it. And so what this meant is that he oversaw the thinking process. He made sure that John was going through the actual problem-solving PDCA cycle, going to the Gemba, going to the place the work happened, got the right information. He wasn't the one actually doing it. And so we have to make that shift as well. How can you create the conditions for learning? So we all want these organizations where people are growing and thriving and feeling great and happy and contributing to learning. But we're running around just fighting the fires. We don't have time for doing that. And so how do we step away from all the firefighting and move more to fire prevention? How do we ask some more questions and give some space for failure and learning? Because all the doing, if we're just doing, we're not being effective in channeling that to the real things that are going to move the needle. And I forgot to say when I introduced myself that, hi, I'm Katie Anderson, and I have a telling habit. And I bet you all do too. This is the number one shift we have to make. We are in a habit of telling, and when we are in firefighting mode, we do that even more because we just feel like it's easier to give all of our answers. And it's not that telling is wrong or bad. We need to set that direction, and we need to give clear feedback. But when we're giving everyone our answer or what we think is the answer, we're not creating that capability. And so we need to right the scale and ask some more questions. And this gets back to how we're leveraging technology too. The answers are going to be generated. It's about how do we ask the right questions to leverage our people's thinking and leverage AI's thinking as well. And people say, oh, but I have the right answer. I have the right answer. And of course you do. In math, there is one right answer. But if my kids, who are 11 and 14, always ask me, for the math answer, and I give it to them, what's going to happen? They keep coming back to me, asking, and they haven't created their capability for learning and solving it. So it might feel short and easy to just quickly give them the answer, although their math is getting more complicated. But they're going to keep coming back to me, and I haven't developed their capability. And the same thing is happening in our organizations. So how are we developing people's capabilities to get to the answer? It's much less important about is it that you have the right answer. It's about how are you helping someone get to the answer or a better answer. And then developing yourself is that third point, because this is hard. We are all conditions that require improvement in our organizations, because the way we are showing up is having an impact on our teams and on all those inputs about how we're then getting to the results. I had the honor of talking to Larry Culp, who is now the CEO of GE Aviation. At the time, he was the CEO of all of GE on stage. He actually read my book and recommended it to everyone at GE, and we had a chance to talk about what it means for him to be leading as a leader like this. And he said he had to unlearn everything that he'd been taught about leadership and management in business school to really be an effective leader, to create this learning organization, to ask more questions, to get out of his office, to go see. And this is the foundation of everything that we talk about when I have my Japan programs, and I help leaders do as well. We have to get out of just staying stuck and receiving reports and looking at information. How are we asking better questions? How are we creating the conditions for learning? So we go back to this concept of Jidoka. How do we separate human work from machine work, and how do we do that most effectively? We talked about AI, so much of the focus of the conference here. And then how do we, again, go back to this concept of how do we ask better questions? How do we most effectively leverage the machine work that's in a way that we didn't even imagine before, that then we're being able to do our human work in an even more and better way. So this is the challenge as we continue to move forward. As machines continue to advance, we have to still think about what are the unique human qualities, the unique humanness that we can bring, and then how do we leverage the machine work as much as possible. And so our superpower becomes much more in asking the right questions, creating the conditions for learning, for the framing, getting out of breaking our telling habit, and really understanding how we can create and foster learning and engagement at all parts of our organization. This is about what I call a chain of learning. So we are all individual links, but what's important is the connection, the bond between us. We're all learners and leaders together, and how do we work most effectively and then help grow that capability across our organization. And if you just have a few individual links who are high performers, you're really not creating that in your organization. So back to the paint story, and I know I'm standing between you and lunch. But here is the incredible thing that his bosses did. So they didn't blame him, they didn't yell at him, and then they did something even more incredible. They said, thank you. Thank you for making that mistake, because you showed to us that we as the managers had not set up the working environment for you to be successful, and that's our responsibility. Thank you for making that mistake, because now we can make sure we can make that improvement. Wow, if we could all change to saying thank you for making that mistake, that's really going to create the true conditions that allow people to experiment, to try things, to know that it's okay to not be perfect, and then we learn our way towards better and perfect as well. And then one other word that's really important to me is intention. And when I moved to Japan, I didn't have business cards, and so I said, put the logo or put the word for intention on my business card. And in Japanese, the kanji symbols represent, on the left side, which I say heart, but it's really samurai and heart means spirit, mind, and heart all in one. So it's the strength of your heart, your inner purpose, the impact you want to have. And the other symbol means direction. And so I see our intentions aren't just something we have cerebrally. It's about truly who do we want to be, what impact do we have, what's our purpose, and then how do we take the actions to align in that, right? And so we need to shift and really understand what are the behaviors we're taking, and are they truly having the impact that we want for our teams, for our families, for our organizations. And Kaizen is not just about continuous improvement. It actually is about starting with ourselves. So I became a bit of a kanji geek when I was living in Japan and studying Japanese. And what I found interesting is this symbol means self, and then this one means whip. So it's like self-whip, like, which really means the self-discipline, but it really shifted the word Kaizen for me. And then this one means change for the good. And so now I always think about, a little Devo song. But so whipping it, you have to whip it to change ourselves for the good. We have to start with ourselves to change ourselves for the good so that we can then help others grow, learn, and develop, and then improve the processes around us. So I brought a few of these. So if you come to the book signing, I might have a few left. These are Daruma dolls that I import from Japan, and I got really obsessed with them. They're like little weeble wobbles, and they represent the Japanese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. And why I love them is they're kind of ugly cute. I still have some big ones too. But you fill in the doll's left eye when you have a goal. And then it's a visual reminder, which is how much more lean could you be about that with visual cues. Visual reminder of your goal, and that you are going to stumble, fall down, make mistakes on the way to getting towards your goal. But what's important is that you get back up and continue your way forward. And then when you achieve your goal, you can fill in the doll's right eye. And of course, in Japan, then they bring it to the Daruma temple, and they burn it every year. But I keep all mine, so yeah, I can't quite bring myself to that. So I want you to think, and going back to that one thing, what is the one thing that you can do when you go back to work to really foster greater learning with your teams? Okay, as you go through this conference, what's the one thing you're going to do that you're going to try?